And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the Feel
Hi.
Inspired podcast. And I have got an incredible guest for you today. We're going completely off piece today, but actually, it's a subject I feel really passionate about. And it does kind of overlap with everything else anyway. So I thought, what the heck? Let me bring this stranger, random person on who we know. We actually met first. We just discovered 15 years ago at Tony Robbins. We were volunteering that year. And I remember it well because it was so
Yeah, I
much fun.
mean, we were only 5 years old, Amit.
I know, right? Telling you what? Well, I think I was about 4. But it's just incredible, like how quick time goes, and how we all just became friends and stuff. And I know we met up a few times after that. We stayed in touch, and we connected on LinkedIn. And I saw you wrote a book, and I thought I've got to get her on the podcast because, like I said, it's a subject I still feel very passionate about. Anything and all things money. So I thought we could delve into that. We can also tackle some of the dating aspects of money
I was going to
because
say, I feel hugely out of my depth because you obviously do talk about dating, and my dating history is like abysmal. So,
well,
what
I'll give you some free coaching on the podcast as well.
I've landed on my feet in the end. But yeah, use me as a case study of what not to do. Then yeah,
Are you actually? I don't know. Are you married now?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! Do you have kids as well?
No.
Right, I'm not going to try not.
Time.
I'm going to try my best not to embarrass you too much. But anyway, for all the ladies and gentlemen out there and everyone else in between, my name is Amit Sodha. This is the Feel Inspired podcast. This is my platform to help inspire you to reach your next level of excellence, I guess is probably the best way to put it. But today's guest is a lovely lady by the name of Roma, and I'm not going to even try and pronounce your surname.
Dhameja.
Dhameja, because do you remember? I don't know if you remember this as well. Like I used to say to you as well. To me, it sounds like good right when you say Dhameja, Dhameja, right? Like as in like you go away, you go.
You know what? Some people do pronounce it like that. I'm pretty chilled about how you do pronounce it. I've probably been called worse, so yeah.
Well, I should hope not. I mean, why would anyone call you worse? But anyway,
Well,
so
I used to run marathons, and at the end of the marathon, they announce your name when you're crossing the line, and it was never right. So I used to just like kind of listen out and wave when I thought it was the right time, but I was probably taking the glory for someone else.
you used to run marathons. Hang on a minute. Wait, when was the last time you ran one?
It's been a while now. It's probably been about 9-10 years. So now I just try and run daily, but it'll be shorter. But no, I used to run marathons.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, I did the marathon in 2021. So, and then the one I did before that was 10 years before that, which was, sorry, in 9 years before that, which was the 2012 marathon. So I did that one as well. So you're not planning to do any more?
No, I've kind of like, I feel like I went through a phase where I kind of ran about 7 or 8 in a year. And I kind of just thought, well, what else have I got to prove? So now I'm
That's a lot of marathon running in a year.
Now we're gonna eat Chris on the sofa and just chill out for a bit. So no, I think I prefer, because it is exhausting and the training for them is exhausting. And I quite like now being able to do it consistently, but to be able to do shorter distances and actually just enjoy the rest of my day and not just feel knackered. So yeah.
I agree with you on that one as well. I wanted to do 2 this year, and that is still the plan. But I think after that will be just 1 a year. I think just to maintain it, just to have something to aim towards.
Yeah.
I've got to admit, like doing a 10K doesn't feel challenging enough at the moment. Maybe a half marathon will in the next couple of years. I'll start doing half marathons instead of marathons. But let's see how it goes. But let's come back to the topic at hand, because what I saw on LinkedIn is obviously you've written a book, so we're going to talk about that as well. And hey, love it. And actually, specifically, it's kind of targeted to adults, but what they educate their children on. Am I right?
So the way that I wrote it was multi-purpose, really. The most common question I get asked, so the book is called What Young People Need to Know About Money. And the most common question I get asked is people on LinkedIn or Twitter will just be like, Roma, when you say young, how young do you have to be? And I'm like, it's fine, you're 45, just read the book. So it's really targeted at young people directly. It doesn't matter from 14 up, I would say, really, or even 11 up. But even adults. So it's there to kind of almost educate parents so that they can have that conversation with their kids if they wish to. Because I think a lot of the time what holds people back is that they don't feel confident in their knowledge about money, and therefore they don't necessarily feel confident in talking to their children about money or their nephews and nieces or whatever it may be. And so it's really there for everyone.
I gotcha. And I don't know if you know a little bit of my backstory as well, because this will paint a bit of context. Because my as you know, I was a complete high school dropout. I really didn't kind of excel in that area, but and I started working from a very young age. And what happened was, because I didn't know how to handle the money I was getting, I got myself into terrible debt, and I ended up paying off that debt. I finally paid it off in 2016. So we're
Wow.
talking, from, I guess, the 90s. We're talking from about 1993 or 4, I reckon, was when the debt started, to 2016. So what are we talking there? 22 years of debt. And at its peak, it reached like 35 grand. Now, in today's terms, that probably wouldn't equate to a lot of money, but back then that was massive. That was, I think you were pretty much at your limit of personal debt that you could hold as an individual. And then I spent years trying to figure out how the hell to get out of this debt, what I could do about it. I had to work hard. It was, a lot of all my money was going towards the repayment, so I barely had any holidays, and it was also one of the reasons that led me becoming suicidal and trying to take my own life. And then, I don't know if you've seen on my blog, I wrote a book about it as well in 2011, 2012. Which is called Move Easily from Poor to Prosperous, and it's still there, still available. You can still buy it on Amazon Kindle. But I had to learn a lot. It was the hard lessons, unfortunately, for me, and so this is why I'm quite fascinated about this subject. So we'll take a deep dive into it. But I want to ask you a first question, because obviously I need to ask this anyway. But who pays on the first date?
I think it's all about levels of comfort, really, and how you feel like it's gone. If you've got personally, I'd be like, if I've got no intention of seeing this person again, I'd probably just go halves. And then I didn't expect this question, so I'm just going to say it. But otherwise, I've got no problem if you are expecting for it to go back and forth. So one person can get it one time, and then the other person can get it, another time if you plan on seeing them again. Is probably my very non-committed response.
I love that, but you know what I mean. The thing is, though, you've obviously given it some thought, and this is the part of the problem I think people face. I don't think they ever give it any thought, and so they always arrive at the same position every time they're in the situation. And because they haven't really thought about it, they're always faced with this conundrum, no matter what it is, unless someone comes along and is very chivalrous and says, you know what, I'm going to pay this one, or whatever. However they handle it, I think we never really give it too much thought. Whereas my opinion has been very different from day one. It's been, what you should do is use it as a setup for a second date. Ideally, go for a date that doesn't involve too much money. Go for a coffee, something really simple in the beginning. But then if you do decide to do something else, great. It should be the setup for the next day. For example, if you say to them, if you like them, say, I'm going to pay. And if you more than want to pay on the next date, you're more than welcome to. And
that's
there you go.
Right, isn't it? To assume that they want to see you.
Well, my opinion is, when you're dating, the answer is always yes, until they've said, look, I'm not interested. It's a dangerous wording I sometimes use with people, and I realized that afterwards. It's always yes until they actually explicitly say no, but I realized actually that's a different dangerous way of putting it. But you should assume they're interested in you until they've actually just said, I'm not interested in you, or don't want to see you again, or they don't call you back. That's okay, that's fine. But until that point, think positively, think they are interested in you, that they want to see you again. Why wouldn't they want to see you again? You're amazing, talented, charming person. That's the way to think about yourself. And if you think like that, guess what? You start to act like that, and people are going to respond to you.
Maybe I thought about myself like that in my 20s.
So how long have you been married?
It's coming up to 8 years.
And when you and your partner got together, what challenges did you have around money? If any?
Well, at the time, I was going through a career change. So I was going from quite a successful career in marketing and events to going into teacher training. And teacher training doesn't pay you a lot, if anything.
That's a big change.
And so that was a really big change. And my mum was getting treatment for breast cancer, and I'd moved back home. So my financial situation had changed a lot. My now husband was kind of starting out in his career, probably in the first kind of 4 or 5 years of his career. He'd been in teaching and was coming out of teaching and going into kind of tech. And
did he not warn you? Did he not warn you, like, stay away from teaching?
No, he's always had really, well, two things really. I think he knows better than to try and provide me with advice. I think that's why we've ended up together, because he doesn't go there. And then the second thing is he's always spoken really fondly about education. So, you know, and he's still in education, just the tech side, so online learning, etc., for university. So, yeah, the financial challenges were that we probably were both quite early on in our careers. And so, you know, we were at a point where we were particularly well off, either one of us. But I think we were both quite grounded about money, in that we felt quite comfortable early on saying, oh, that I can't do that right now, or I'm going to have to wait until payday, or whatever. You know, neither of us was trying to show that we were richer than we were or wealthier than we were. And I think that's the issue that most people are kind of where they get themselves stuck. And I think the other issue is that the amount that we align money to self-worth. And I'm happy to talk about this kind of in more detail later on if you want. But I have found it like so liberating since I've understood that money is a tool and it's not a reflection of my self-worth. Because I think your life is so limited when you see the accumulation of your bank balance as your self-worth. When you realize it's a tool, you will take more risks. Because think about it, if you were going to see money as a reflection of your self-worth, you'd never take any risks. You'd never start a business. You'd never change career. You'd never do any of those things that could be really fulfilling and good for you. And when you don't do that, when you realize it is a tool to have a fulfilling life, well, then it's a completely different thing. You know, it's a completely different ball game. You can talk more openly about it. You can talk about the risks that you're taking. Like, for instance, at that time I was changing career. And why was I doing that? Well, actually, I was willing to give up a job that I was quite good at to do something more fulfilling and see if I could get that level of wealth, or if I could get that, you know, that kind of financial reward and fulfillment somewhere else. And that was okay because I saw money in a different way.
I completely understand where you're coming from, but I think it's hard for people not. So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, because I think that having been someone who was deeply in debt, and when you have no options, like you said, it's a tool. Money's a tool. But when you don't have that tool at your disposal, it affects every element of your life, including your self-worth, not just your self-worth. And I think that that's where, for me, it stems a bit deeper than that kind of thing. Do you see what I mean?
Oh yeah, and I'm completely not saying, like, for instance, one of the chapters in my book is about money and mental health.
Yeah.
You know, and where to seek advice, etc. And you cannot deny the link between money and mental health. You know, all the data is so clear about that. So please don't get me wrong. I'm certainly not promoting a lifestyle where, you know, you have 2 pairs of clothes. You know, I am not, you know, I'm not even a minimalist. You know what I mean? In any way, shape, or form. That is not what I'm promoting. But what I'm saying is, after your level of comfort, you know, after your level of comfort, when your basics are taken care of and you've got a reasonable life, after that, to equate every additional bit to your self-worth probably isn't the right way to go. And like you said, money gives you choices. You know, I was doing a talk with some 6th formers, and I can remember saying, I was doing it to 6th form girls, actually, because one of the talks that I do is around the disparity in education for girls and for boys around money and the different experiences that they have around money. And how that then shows itself later on in life, and the gender pay gap, etc., etc. And I said to them, you know, I was going to play Jessie J's "It's Not About the Money" when you were coming in, and then I listened to it and I was like, she's lying. A large part of your happiness will come from making sure that you are financially stable, that you are able to cover your basics, that you're able to treat yourself, that you're able to get away when you need a break, that you are not forced to do work that you don't find fulfilling just for the money. You know, that's a big thing. So yeah, that's definitely not what I'm suggesting here.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's why I asked you the question. I want to clarify that for people listening, because I think that, like I said, just from personal experience, it knocked every aspect of my life when I was in that situation. And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, kind of thing. It's one of those, you know, situations, once you've been there in life, you never want to be there again. And but on the flip side to that, it taught me so much about myself, and made me realize, yes, although I'm not motivated by money as such, you still need to have a good handle on it, a good grip on it, and to have plenty of it to thrive. But as soon as you have money woes, it starts to knock very serious, because I don't know if you know Bob Proctor, right? And he I think, I'm pretty sure he said this as well. It's amazing how much free time you have when you don't have to think about money. And I think
Mm,
that's true.
mm.
Your mind and your thoughts get preoccupied with everything, because you're thinking that you put it in this context. You're thinking, should I buy this? Should I not buy this? Should I do this? What do I need to save on? What do I need to sacrifice today? What do I need to? Can I afford this? Can I not afford this? Can I do this? So it does take up such an incredible amount of your mental capacity that it can have a big impact on you. So yeah, I completely get what you're saying, and I think that that's a good clarification for anyone out there to understand that they're not intrinsically linked, but of course it can have a knock-on effect
You need to have
overall.
a base level. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So tell us more about your book, and why did you decide to write this book, and what other areas have you covered, and what do you teach now, especially to not just to young people but everyone out there? What are the things that you think that people don't know that they probably should know?
Yeah, so that's a lot. So okay, let me go through it. And if I miss
Yeah,
anything,
yeah. I know. I have this habit of asking like 12 questions in one.
so why did I decide to write the book? Let's start there. So I have been teaching business and economics to kind of 14 to 19-year-olds for now probably about 9 years. Okay. And I worked, like I said, I went into teaching after a career in marketing and events. And then I went into teaching, and I realized I was quite lucky. I've been up the ladder in the teaching profession. So I was, a vice principal last year. And I realized that even though I was teaching these subjects, there was a lot kind of in terms of like basic money knowledge that was not being taught. So it was all to do with how money affects firms or industry or the economy as a whole for a country, but not how it affects the individual. And so I felt like that was really missing. So that's one reason. And it really came out of the book is full of questions that students have asked me over the years. When you've got 5 minutes at the end of the lesson and a kid, when they feel comfortable with you, they're just like, Miss, when did you get a mortgage? Like, where did you go and get it from? Or when they're 18 and they're like, do I get a credit card? Do I not? Kind of thing. And naturally, because I teach those subjects, I would often get asked those questions. So it came out of that and that realization that they weren't getting that anywhere. And sometimes, it wasn't that the parents didn't want to talk to them about that. It's, they've got a million other things that they're doing. They're trying to spend quality time with their kids, etc., etc. And so it was like, actually, is anybody giving this to them in a way where it makes sense and it's in context, etc., etc. So that was one of the reasons. The second reason was my own experience of money. So I grew up, my parents, came over to the UK from India. They had very little money, and so they worked exceptionally hard. But I think I was about 16 or 17, and my dad went bankrupt. And we lost everything. And when I say we lost everything, somebody knocked on the door and said, you've got 2 hours to grab what you want, and we're taking the house, kind of thing. And so we lost everything. And that was actually the first time that my parents spoke to me about money, because I had to start contributing.
How old were they and how old were you?
So they were in their 50s.
Okay.
I was 16, 17. And, and watching my dad build everything from scratch. I got my first mortgage when I was in my early 20s because he was bankrupt, and so it was for their house, etc. And so it was really important for me, for instance, from the age of 18 to make sure I had a really good credit rating, because it wasn't just me who relied on that. It was my parents that relied on that. So do you see what I'm saying? So you start making you start learning very quickly, and you start making good money decisions because you're having those conversations with your parents. And I honestly look back at that period, and I think it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And a bit like when you say, you wouldn't want to go back, but you learn a heck of a lot. And sometimes it's the struggle that teaches you. And obviously, I don't want that struggle for any of my students. But if I can give them those little bits of knowledge in a form that they can understand with my knowledge of teaching and how they can digest it, well, then why not? So that's kind of why I wrote the book. I saw a gap in the curriculum. And my personal experience told me that these conversations are not necessarily happening. Over 9 years, I've done a lot of the activities in the book. I've done them with students. Like there's an activity in there that gets you to imagine what you want your life to look like in, let's say, 5 years' time and cost it up. Because unless you know what you're aiming for, how are you going to get there?
Mm.
Unless you know. And then I say to, and you can do that at 30, you can do that at 40, you can do that at 50, whenever you like. But I say to a lot of my students, well, then work your way backwards. Is the job that you're going for, is it going to give you that lifestyle? Because one of them is going to have to move, Or have you got unrealistic expectations for 5 years' time? Is it 10 years' time? In order for them to manage their expectations. So a lot of what is in the book are conversations that I've had with young people. And what I've realized that they don't, that, a lot of the information that they're not getting. And go on.
No, I was just going to say as well, like what you said is quite important, I think. And I don't think people realize how important it is. Because when I told you my story, one of the first things that happened to me was that I was in a part-time job. And I remember one day, and I remember the experience really well. So I was going home that day. I had to stop at the cash machine to get some cash out. And I didn't know the difference between what was written at the end of my balance between the CR and the DR. And I didn't realize I'd gone into an overdraft. I had no idea that happened. I didn't even know I had an overdraft. I didn't even know what that was at that point. And that's how the debt started, from a simple overdraft that no one taught me about. And as a result, that spiraled into God knows how much of debt, right? It was a lot of debt.
Look at the experience of young people now with Klarna. How readily available is that debt? And how worrying is that? I know 13-year-olds that are in I know 18-year-olds that are in £3,000 worth of debt already. And they've just started their financial, journey.
Yeah.
And it's nuts. And I just thought to myself, well, somebody's got to tell them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to hit them hard.
So true. Yeah, no. And on the flip side to that, what options they do have now to manage their money so much better than, say, when we were younger. Like, you look at apps like Plum, and I think there's plenty of other ones that are there for youngsters where they can put their money and actually create, like, things like on Revolut, you can create a little vault that puts money aside for you and you don't even know about it, right? I had to look at my Revolut the app the other day, I had like 50 quid in my vault. I was like, oh, cool, right? I didn't even realize it was there. And but that's a good thing. I think sometimes putting money away and forgetting about it is a brilliant thing. And so they have so much more tools. But the question is, do they know? Is anyone actually teaching them? Is anyone actually giving them any sense of, how to use these tools, what they're for, ways to manage it, and all this kind of stuff? And I think, like you said, from what you said, I think it's still pretty vacant out there, that it isn't part of the mainstream curriculum where it should be.
Well, the thing that I wanted to highlight, and I was just going to come on to this, is that it's not financial literacy has been put into the curriculum. It's very basic. And I certainly don't think it's the fault of teachers. I've worked with the most incredible, I've worked in a whole range of schools, and I've worked with the most incredible teachers. And believe you me, they bust their gut covering the curriculum, and there is so much that they give to those kids that is beyond the curriculum. But what we have to remember as well is a lot of those teachers have just come out of uni. Some of our finest teachers have just come out of uni. What's their experience of finance? They haven't bought their first house. And so expecting them to be able to teach our young people about it with their limited knowledge is also unfair. And that's why I wrote the book the way that I did. So just to give you an idea, I was quite far down with a publisher who wanted me to change it into a textbook, so that, the answers weren't there and it was a textbook and you could and I reworked one chapter and I knew it didn't feel right, because I wanted it to be transparent. I wanted a 14-year-old kid to be able to pick it up. I wanted a 38-year-old person to be able to pick it up and have all the answers there. I wanted a teacher to be able to pick it up and have all the answers there within the book. So everything that you need to know is in the book. Okay, all the answers to the questions that I ask, all the things that I get people to think about are in there. Okay, and so going back to the point is that it's not really the fault of education, is that they've got so much to teach and the limited hours that they've got. It's not one of the key areas that Ofsted or the government look at in terms of how well are you teaching, etc. And also to expect that level of financial literacy from our teachers who are in their early 20s is not fair, unless you're going to give them the training and make it a core part of the curriculum.
Well, I think that's partly the point that you're absolutely right. It's amazing teachers out there, but it is the fault that it's not the part of the curriculum, and it should be. I think it should be. Do you know? I've always said this as well, and I said this to someone else on one of my other podcasts as well. 2 things we don't teach in school: dating and money. Why not? 2 of the most important areas of life that will affect us for the rest of our lives, the decisions we make. Why are we not teaching about this? And that's not to say that you take I know this is a whole big debate about taking the responsibility away from the parents or anything like that. No, it's about sharing that responsibility. It's not taking it away. But if as a youngster, no one taught me about dating, no one taught me about money. And so I went out in the world and had no clue and screwed up at both. And so it has to be there in some capacity. Yes, I know some other things may need to be sacrificed. And I've got to be honest, I think a lot of things could be actually sacrificed in space of that, because these 2 things are far too important to not have in the curriculum.
I think, like I said, having worked in education, I think schools do a phenomenal job.
They do.
And I think every person you ask will look at the curriculum and be like, well, you can take that away. I've never used that before, kind of thing. And what you're trying to do, and the challenge is, of course, you are trying to, in limited hours, provide all the knowledge a human being needs. And that is, that's an impossible task, really. And also you're trying to prepare them. And my book looks at this as well. So the book is divided into 3. So the first bit is personal finance. The middle bit is the economy. So do you understand the world in which money works? The kind of infrastructure in which money works. What is a boom? What is a recession? Do you actually get that, etc.? And then, and how does that affect you as an individual? And then the final section is about recruitment and the world of work and how that's changing. And, the other challenge, just going back to the curriculum, is you're preparing kids for a world and you don't even know what it's going to look like. You've got no idea what it's going to look like.
Yeah, so Ken Robinson talked about that a lot, didn't he, as well? Like we're preparing kids for a world that's not going to exist anymore.
And so that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that there is so much to teach, so much to try and get into the curriculum between the hours of 8:30 and 3.
But this is where I think sorry, not you, I'm speaking just generally, but this is where I think that as any educational establishment should in some ways outsource this to specialists who have knowledge and can teach it to children. So especially when to chuck too much onto kids at a young age, they don't need it. But say from about 14 onwards, you should get speakers in who are experts.
Oh, they do.
But the thing is as well, like I'm sure they do, but I think the importance is not there. As in why this is
the importance is not there, but how do you give anything importance if you're just going to get a speaker in? Do you see what I'm saying? It has to have, I think one of the best bits of teacher training I ever did was I followed a student's timetable for a day.
Yeah.
I mean, you're sitting down for like 6-7 hours a day and you're being taught, like 1 minute you're being taught geography and the next minute you're being taught math and stuff like that. And it's difficult to absorb it all. And so having a speaker in occasionally to talk to you about money, it's natural that you won't remember all of that. People will listen to this podcast and they'll walk away and they might remember some snippets and they won't remember other bits. And it's that repetition of it. And so it's difficult. And if you're going to do that, then you have to allocate some time to it, and quite a lot of time to it is what I'm saying. So at some point, out of everything that we want our young people to know, we have to decide which bits we're going to pick. Yeah. And that's the challenge, isn't it? And that's where I go back to, I'm sure if we had 100 people in a room and showed them the entire curriculum, they would all pick different bits. And then some people would bring some other bits in. So.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think I think it's like you said, it's not an easy balance to strike. It's there's going to be no perfect solution to this, no matter how hard we try.
But I've tried in the book.
Yeah. You've at least made an attempt, right? And when I've given talks in schools and stuff as well, because obviously this has been a huge part of my journey, I talk about it a little bit without giving financial advice as well, which you've got to be very careful of. But just giving people an insight to what the lack of knowledge did, hopefully in the hope that actually it sparks a bit of their interest and they want to go find out more information by themselves so they can do it in their own time. You know, I mean, what I know now, oh my God, if I'd known when I was younger, I would have been, you know, a different story. Of course, I wasn't interested in it then. And I look back to, you know, if I was a young person now, would there anything have changed? Would I have been interested in it if someone had shoved it down my throat?
Would you have, you know, I was listening to a podcast not long ago and they were writing letters to their younger selves. Like the guests would always end with a letter to their younger self. And one of the guests just started the letter off with, "I know you're not going to listen to any of this." And that's the thing, isn't it? That makes sense in hindsight. And so, yeah, you can flag it up and you can do as much as you can, and then hope that the person runs with it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any creatives out there who could think of better ways to pass this knowledge on so that people could be more interested. Youngsters can be more interested in it. I think it's such a tricky juggling act. It's not easy.
I do think young people are interested. I think, you know, they really want to know how much people get paid. And there's an element of that is societal. It's rude to ask people how much they get paid. You know, so the first question that I often ask them is, put your hand up if you've ever wanted to ask somebody how much they get paid, but you've not done it because you think it's rude. And so many hands go up.
Yeah, like when you walk into, like, if you're doing a class or you're talking about this to a group of students, you ever just ask them the question, how many of you want to be rich?
Yeah, and what their idea of rich is. You know, what is, you know, if I was to ask, so I have asked, you know, some 14-year-old business students. They were mainly boys, and I can remember going, you know, how rich do you want to be? What's wealthy? And it's weird, but the number always comes to like 1 mil. And I'm like, why? And they go, because that's what the rappers have said. I said, well, that's your frame of reference.
But that's interesting, because I think to myself that actually the money amount is, you know, that's rudimentary. Like this it doesn't really matter, but it is I like, you know, so then the immediate follow-up question to that, to ask youngsters is, right, how many of you would like to know how to get rich? And you know, I use the word rich. Actually, I would replace that with wealthy, because I think that's a completely different mindset.
And people have connotations of what wealth is.
Exactly.
You know, and one of the greatest quotes that I heard was, "Wealth is money unspent." So your wealth.
I've heard so many different definitions and so many amazing ones. And there was Chris Rock was doing a comedy skit once, and he was talking about how this is how he defines the difference between rich and wealthy. And he goes, you look at the time, not now, but if you look at the time of when Shaq was still playing basketball, for example, Shaquille O'Neal, he said Shaq is rich, but the guy who pays his paycheck, that guy is wealthy. And it's and then if you look at things like Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about obviously generational wealth and what it really means. And for me, if I were to define it, it would be to have enough that money is off the table.
Yeah. And whatever, and that can be different. And that can be different amounts for different people.
Exactly. Like for me, I have no desire to have a yacht or a private jet or anything like that. But I tell you what, I'd love to, like, this is kind of my definition of it, is that you know, I'm not even a huge traveler, but when I do travel, I'm 6'3". I don't want to be in economy. I want to be in first class or business class minimum, that I can travel around and not have to think about buying a first class ticket or a business. That's, you know, for that's my level of wealth that I like. Obviously, having plenty stashed away that is there for whatever I want in the future, but I don't have really that much expensive taste. But that would be one way I would define it, to be able to travel in comfort. When you're 6'3" and you've traveled in economy for 11 hours, that is enough to drive you to like, you know, like, I'll take my life right now. It's a nightmare. It really is a nightmare. When someone puts their seat back and you're that tall, it's a killer. So that was it's just one fun way I define it, and that was someone else's, and other people define it a certain way. And you're right, there is no figure that matches everyone, but everyone has an idea of what that means, what that looks like.
And in the book, one of the questions I ask is, does money? So one of the things that I kind of talk about is, does money make you happy? And I just refer to research, you know, because obviously it's so personal for people. But, you know, there's a great TED talk out there, and in it, you know, they say that the average amount of where your kind of happiness starts to plateau, it doesn't actually make such a big impact in your life, is around, I think it's around 52K, 52 to 54.
As a salary?
As a yearly income, yeah. So
Oh
as
yeah,
a
okay,
yearly
cool, yeah.
income, yeah. And then I think, and it doesn't talk about how much you have in savings, etc., because it would vary. But it's interesting that they then look at what then, when people say that they are happy with that amount, what then increases their, in economics we call it utility, or what increases their happiness after that. And it's what you can do with it, how you can help other people with it, how you can then stop, kind of help family members to stop worrying about money, and how that makes an impact on your life. So yeah, I think it's different amounts for everybody. And that's why one of the exercises that comes quite early on is thinking about what you want your life to look like. It's a personal journey, what you want your life to look like, and thinking about how much of that is going to cost you. And it doesn't matter if it's a third of what it costs the person that's sitting next to you, or it's double that, it's what your expectations are. Because I think one of the things that, you asked me why I wrote the book, was I was bumping into students that I taught, 4 or 5 years earlier. And I teach them right at the end of their educational journey, really, at 18. And then they're deciding whether they're going to go to uni, or they're deciding whether they're going to go down the apprenticeship route into work, etc. And you'd see them 4 or 5 years later, and you could really see where, for some of them, their expectations and reality just hadn't matched up, and it was getting them down. And if I give you an example of that, the BBC did some research, and it asked teenagers how much they expect to be earning at the age of 30. And the average that these teenagers thought they would be earning at the age of 30 was 70K.
Yeah.
The average in the UK is 32 to 35K.
Yeah.
So can you see how those expectations and reality are unlikely to match up and make you really unhappy, when actually, if a kid is on about 35K, they're doing really well. And so it's kind of getting them to reframe how they think about money, their expectations around money, and to set their own expectations about money, rather than the world kind of feeding into it, especially with social media. Think about all the things that they see on social media. And they know it's not real. I get I mean, I'm always a bit dubious when older people are saying, these young people are watching social media and they think they should have a jet at 25. And I'm like, they're not stupid. They know it's not real. We've caught enough Instagram influencers who've taken photos in business class and then gone and sat in economy and being caught by their fans. They know it's not real. It doesn't mean that they don't want it.
Yeah, and by the way, I was going to say that just on that side note, when you mentioned that TED talk, I saw that one years ago. Unless there's a different one, because unless you've seen there's a more recent one. But I saw one similar to that several years ago. But the other one that was really worth watching for anyone, and I don't know if you've ever shown this one to your students or suggested they watch it, but one by a guy called Paul Piff, Does Money Make You Mean?
Oh, okay. No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a brilliant one. It's really worth watching that one as well, because he does an experiment at the beginning of that where he gets 2 students, for example, into a room, and they've given them a Monopoly board, and they've deliberately given one with more money, 2 dice, the other one only has 1 dice, etc., etc.
You know what? I've read about it as opposed to watching the TED talk, but go on.
Yeah, but it's just funny to watch. I don't want to spoil it too much, but just, the sense of entitlement that comes into it when people who have money. But also what was great was what the solution was. I'm not going to spoil it. If anyone wants to go out and watch that talk, in fact, I'll link it as well, because it's worth watching it. But it goes back to what you were saying a little while ago, actually, but it's not as difficult or as complex that people think it may be. But actually, even from a rich person's perspective, it is just a little bit of education for them, understanding what they have and what they can do with this money, because not everyone realizes that. Yeah, I didn't know about investing till probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe. That was completely new to me. But and so what was I then? 40, 41, and like, I just think to myself, God, if I had kids, I'd be teaching them that from day one, literally from the first day they could say, Dad, give me money. I'd be teaching them about money, kind of thing, right? That would be my thing. But it's there's so much out there. Sorry, I digressed ever so slightly there, but it's just, I think it's fascinating. Everything you were saying there is so true, so true. The perception of it is fascinating, how it differs from person to person, how it's portrayed at the moment as well. Even more so, how much is dangerously portrayed, and giving those false sense of expectations, and like you mentioned about the average and things like that. And then to tie into this as well, in the work that you do and when you've written about it in the book, have you ever touched on, or do you touch upon the whole idea of bringing in the whole concept of passion, or finding something you love to do and bringing that into your work?
How I kind of look at that is, again, I didn't want the book to come across as preachy. That's not my point. You know, I'm not telling you how to invest. I'm not telling you how to run your life. I'm not telling you any of those things. I'm just telling you what's out there. So in the section around kind of recruitment and the workplace, I do talk about the idea of a side hustle. And, you know, the fact that because I wish somebody had told me that earlier. I think I would have had those a lot earlier. I always had ideas. I was always brimming with ideas. You know, I was on a market stall with my dad, you know, from all the seconds from the factory, etc., from the age of about 7. So, you know, I always had ideas of how I was going to make money. But I wish somebody had told me about the value of a side hustle, and you can just do it. And the internet allows you to do that. But what that allows you to do is then pursue your passion. And, you know, I do put in there, you may not want to make money out of all of your passions. And I think that's a really strong message as well. Like, you don't have to monetize everything. You know, you might just enjoy doing it and keep money out of the equation. But I also talk about how, for instance, it can empower you. You know, you might decide to use that money that you make from your side hustle for something else. You might decide to make it your main source of income eventually. Or you might decide it's the way that you express yourself outside of work hours, and you're quite happy to have it on the side. For women, for instance, women who have children, who often have an average of about a 3-year gap on their CV, because that's when, you know, the kind of free nursery hours kick in, etc., etc. It's great because it means that they can have that consistency in their CV and that continuation, but they've done something else, you know, that fits around them having a child, so that when they go back into the workplace, they can still demand a same level of income as they did when they left. You know, they've not been completely out of the workplace, and they've got something to show for it. And so I do talk about passions in terms of that sense. I didn't feel comfortable in terms of talking about how you find your passion, etc., etc. I think the hardest thing about this book was, because if you think about it, money touches everything, doesn't it? It touches all aspects of your life, your relationships, what you do with your time, you know, your mental health. The hardest thing about this book was what I was going to keep out. It wasn't actually what I was going to put in, you know. And so I've tried to hint towards that in the bits that I talk about side hustles, etc., etc.
Isn't that what they say, right? Wisdom is knowing what not to say rather than what to say.
I don't even know if I've got it right. You know, the response to the book has been amazing, which is really nice. Schools are buying it for their kids, you know, and parents have been absolutely phenomenal in their response as well. I had one parent contact me, and I thought this was beautiful. She said, I'm sitting down with my teenage boy, and we've just bought your book. And she said, we're doing the exercise where he's imagining what he wants his future life to be. And it turns out he's not half as superficial as I thought he was. And I quite like him.
I love that.
Yeah, she was like, I'm actually really proud of the son that I've raised. And I was like, good for you. But she just said, I want to thank you because I'm having the most fascinating conversation with him. And I think that's brilliant. And so of course, you want to launch a book and you want to change the world. But to me, that is changing the world. If I can get people to have a conversation, if I can give young people the guts to go to a restaurant and ask the owner about what made them start the restaurant, how long it took them to break even, perhaps, or something like that. You know, if I can get those conversations going, then to me, that is success, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that is a beautiful story as well, and I've heard similar stories like that. You know, when it comes to coaching and stuff like that, you know, people have had the difficult conversations with, whether it's their partner, whether it's their children, whether it's someone in their life, and the impact they can have. You know, they don't realize that they're always fearing these difficult conversations, but actually when they have it, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad, right? You know, that was actually quite pleasant and quite insightful. But it's amazing how much we shy away from this subject. Like, people are just so scared of talking about money. And, you know, I see it all the time, dating relationships. And then I mean, I was coaching someone recently, and like, this individual had been with their partner for on and off for a number of years, and I was asking them some deep questions about what they do, and because I think money was a bit of a contentious subject in the relationship, and I said, "Do you know this about your partner?" She was like, "Not really," and I was like, "You've been together 7 years. How can you not know something like this? It's a long, long time," and so. It's amazing how much people are afraid of the subject, but actually once you get it out on the table, it can actually be quite empowering, and
Mm.
in all forms of relationships, whether it's a spouse, whether it's your children, whether it's family or whatever. But I think it's one of these things that people are almost embarrassed to talk about as well. The people, and is that something for you that you kind of hope to change with people and getting them out of this
Yeah,
embarrassed mindset? And
absolutely. And again, it comes back to that. It is not a reflection of your self-worth. Of course, if people are having a really hard time, I completely understand with money. I completely understand that it would feel that way.
Hmm.
But you as an individual are worth more than what is in your bank account, you know. And I really hope that people do feel comfortable. We're talking with children as well about with their young people about money and their partners after having a chat about this or reading the book, for two reasons really. I think you can have, so in terms of relationships, I think you can have more deep and meaningful relationship. Like I said, when me and my husband got together, we were quite early on in our careers. Then quite early on, I was earning more than he was, and then he was then earning more than I was, etc. And it went back and forth for a little while, okay, because of various changes or promotions or whatever it may be. At the moment, I've taken a step back. So I've kind of gone part-time to be able to promote the book. I've started my own business, etc. So I'm taking some financial risks. And he's not. He's very stable in his career. But because we've always spoken about money, there's that underlying thing of, I've got you. At the moment, I'm in a better place financially than you are, and I've got you. And tomorrow, you might be in a better place than I am, and I know you'll have my back as well. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think it actually makes for a richer relationship. In terms of parents or even aunts and uncles talking to their young people, I think it's really important for young people to see some of the challenging decisions that adults have to make around money. Obviously we don't want to lay all of our hardships on our children. I completely get that. But to have those conversations of, we can't have that. We could, if you wanted, your mom or your dad to work even longer, or would you rather have us at home? You know what I mean? That's a decision that we're making. Or if we go on this holiday, we're going to have to take on some debt. And I'm not comfortable doing that. And to just be really honest with young people about that. Because what that will then do is normalize those challenges for them later on in life. And the problem is, if you say to them, everything comes easily, yeah, we're going on this big fat holiday, even though most of it is on your credit card, okay, they're going to think that's normal. And so they won't question it themselves, and they will find themselves in debt. Now, you might be fine having a holiday, doing a holiday on credit card debt, whatever, borrowing money for it, because you know that you've got money coming in and you're going to pay it off. But unless you're having that dialogue with them, how are they going to make those choices later on? Or is it just going to be an expectation? Like, where does this thing come from that you have to have a holiday every year? It's weird, isn't it? The number of people that just say, oh, I've not had a holiday all year, I deserve it. I'm like, do you really deserve it? And sometimes, and I know it sounds harsh. Yeah. I know it sounds really harsh, but some people are like, oh, I've worked really hard this week, I deserve to. And I'm like, you had a job. You did your job. Okay. And so this idea of constantly treating yourself, and don't get me wrong, I'm the first person. I love doing that. On a Friday, if you've had a really tough week, I want to go out to eat, or I want to go buy myself something nice, etc. But also having the conversations around, that's what you want to do, but the longer term impact might not be where you want to end up. I think that conversation is really important, because unless we tell young people that these are the decisions that we're having to make, the difficult decisions we're having to make, they're going to be under the impression that it should be easy. And then when somebody offers them a credit card, with really unfavorable terms, they're going to take it.
Yes, no, so true. And that leads nicely on to some of these bigger lessons that people need to take away in this day and age. I think that, and we're not just talking children here, we're talking adults, because I
Yeah.
think there's plenty of adults out there also making, um, poor choices or just not knowing what options there are. So what's some of the things that you talk to people about at the moment who come to you and ask you questions like, I don't know about you, but for example, I had an investment account, but I closed it because I prefer to just use apps because it's easier. So I use an app called Free Trade for all my investing. I do crypto a little bit as well. But it's amazing how many people don't know of these things, or there are tools like, for example, what we mentioned earlier about Revolut, being able to use a tool like that. So when you spend money, there's few extra pennies or whatever it puts it aside. So then, when you look back and, or what it does is that even if you set that vault up, I really love this feature. You set it up for, say, a year or 2 years or whatever, or a year, so you can have a yearly holiday, but it adds up all those little, or adds a pound or whatever. So by the end of the year, you've got, 500 quid, 1,000 quid, who knows, for your holiday, and it's there and you haven't even thought about it really. So these are some of the things that I look at and I try and utilize as best as I can. But what else do you tell people? What advice do you give to people who are not so financially savvy, and what things do they need to know?
So, like I said, I'm not a financial advisor, so I don't necessarily provide that advice as such. But actually, the most common conversation I have is around time. And that you can put money aside. You're not going to be a millionaire in 1 year, because our expectations around time are nuts. You look at someone like Warren Buffett. He made the bulk of his money after the age of 64.
He did, yeah.
And so this idea that if you start saving at 20, by 25, you're going to buy a house, in cash. And I'm not saying that it can't be done. This is the key. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but what I am saying is, so the two things that I constantly bang on about is it takes time. So start doing small bits regularly. Make sure, for instance, that you have a direct debit that is putting money into, let's say, the S&P 500, even if it's just 50 quid a month. Get into the habit, okay? Because I think your financial future is the result of your habits, not one-off things or an app that you download this week or anything like that. It's your habits. So everything that you're talking to me about that vault, etc., it's a habit-forming thing, isn't it? Okay? So the first thing I talk to them is about their habits and getting into those habits. And if you know you've got bad habits, if you know that if you have money sitting in your current account, you're going to spend it, then get it out the day you get paid. Put it in a separate account that you can't see. And then don't, even if I can remember with someone, I was saying, start an account in a separate bank. Don't download their banking app so that you don't know how much is in there, and just have money going out. Or put it in like your investment account so that it can be spread across, a portfolio of companies. So that's the first thing, is that it takes time. Compound interest is a thing, but it's a long-term thing. And so I talk to them about that in terms of kind of expectations and time. And that's a big thing. But also the other thing is that invest in what you are comfortable with and what you know. I don't invest in cryptocurrency because I don't know much about it and I don't get it. Okay. And I don't have a problem with saying, and I think sometimes people feel like they can't, how we feel a bit nervous about talking about money or a bit shy about talking about money. I think sometimes feel like people feel nervous about saying what they do and don't know. And so I'm saying to you, I don't get cryptocurrency. I don't feel safe investing in it. So I don't. There are certain things that I get and I invest in those. Some people invest in art. That is not me.
That's not me either.
Some people invest in vintage cars. That is also not me. Some people invest in handbags. I wish that could be me, but it is not. Kind of thing. So invest in things that you are comfortable with and that you understand. And take the time to understand them. If it's going to be property, make sure you understand the property markets. Look at the property markets in different countries and how have they responded to different shocks in the economic system. If it's going to be bonds, if it's going to be gold, whatever it may be, have a look at what you're investing in, and don't invest in things you don't understand. And it's okay not to understand some of them. Just because crypto is supposed to be the golden goose now, doesn't mean that you should be in it.
Yeah, and the other thing I was just going to add, because while you were talking, something popped into my head, is that we mentioned it earlier about expectations, and I think that this is where it's so easy for someone to have the expectation that just because, let's say you take two people who are 25 and one's earning 30 grand a year and the other one is earning 100 grand a year. It's very easy to assume that the other person, the one earning 100 grand a year, is better off and is happier, but also knows how to manage that money, because actually more often than not, they don't know how to manage that money, and so they'll spend it frivolously, if I could even say that word, frivolously, and then often get themselves into debt as well. And this is a known phenomenon, that sometimes when people earn more, because they're more, or should I say less responsible with their money, they actually do worse with it and create even more debt. And they believe that because I'm earning money, I could go into debt. It's okay as well.
I'm laughing because this is so true. When I was at uni, I had like 3 jobs during my masters, and I was making it rain. My standard of living was so low. I was happy to eat pasta and beans every day, or like pot noodles or whatever. And I lived in student accommodation, and everything was quite cheap. Then I got into my 20s, and I was earning money. I was earning a lot more money working full time, but I felt broke. And so you're talking about expectations, is that understand, I think one of the best things you can do, to be honest with you, is as you start going up the career ladder, is not to dramatically change your lifestyle. Stop trying to keep up with the Joneses. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, the number of people, I can remember when I bought my house, and it's just your average kind of 3-bed, semi-detached house. And a number of people who were just like, oh, so the next move will be a detached bonnet. And I was like, no, it won't.
Yeah.
No, I'm not leaving here. I'm going to stay here. It's a small house. I don't have to clean very much. I don't have to look after this is where I'm staying. You know what I mean? And, or when people, just because they've gone up the career ladder, they feel like they need to get a bigger car or whatever. I mean, fair enough. If that's what floats your boat, you're entitled to go and get those things. But make sure that you don't keep eating into the extra income that you're getting, and do something else with it. That is, hopefully invest it in something that isn't going to depreciate.
Because you are no richer. If you're spending more as you earn more, you're no richer anyway, right? So what's the point? So it doesn't make any sense. So I guess last couple of questions. First thing is, by the way, I'll just say hi, Cyrus. Yes, I've seen your question. I apologize, I was ignoring you earlier, but we'll come back to that. But main thing I wanted to ask you, is there anything that we haven't kind of spoke about today, which you think is important for people to hear about the subject, that you could scream it to the world? What would it be? What's the one thing you would say to people?
Probably 2 things. And you're probably thinking I asked you for one thing and now you're giving me 2, but there you go.
That's fine. No, more the merrier.
Is that it's really, really important. If you look at any of the data, the way that finances affect women and men is very different. Okay. The research shows that girls are still excluded from financial conversations at home, even though more of them will end up managing the household budget, and that women are more likely to be affected by poverty. Okay. So it's really important that we start changing that and having those conversations with our girls. Okay. So that would be my first thing. And the second thing is, I think one of the best gifts that we can give people is to remind them that they can be active participants in the economy. You don't just have to work, get your retirement fund, and then 2022 is a beautiful time to be alive. The internet is absolutely phenomenal if you use it wisely, and slow and steady wins the race. My dad has always said to me, if it comes quickly, it'll go just as quick.
Yeah. That's a good saying, and I love that. I've heard that before as well, and it's so true as well. I can't remember if it was my dad who said that to me as well, but I know someone old and wise said that to me as well, the same thing. And it's so true. There was loads more we could talk about on the subject, because it's unlimited when it comes to, hence unlimited my blog. But there's so much you could talk about when it comes to this subject. But I think we have to draw a line at some point. But it's been really fascinating speaking to you, and very insightful. And I think on all fronts, even the dating front, the future parents of all the people I speak to going to become future parents and stuff. I think it's really helpful to people to understand this and know that this shouldn't be a subject excluded from your discussions, because it's one of those subjects that I think that people can get people into the most trouble. But I wanted to say thank you for your time. It's a pleasure as well. Oh, by the way, so where can people reach out to you? Where can they get your book if they wanted to get it?
Of course. So it's available on Amazon. Can we put the link in the show notes, etc.?
We will. We'll put the links in.
You can find me on LinkedIn. You're more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Insta at Roma_creates. And you'll probably see a lot of I've started a business in fashion. I've started a fashion brand, so you'll probably see some of that stuff on there as well. So, but yeah, you're more than welcome to connect with me on there. And I'd be happy to discuss anything with you.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure, and a pleasure having you on, but also reconnecting as well, and seeing that beautiful smile of yours, of course, as well. So.
It was lovely to speak to you too, and thank you. It's felt quite easy to just have a chat with you about this.
Oh no, I'm glad. Well, I'm glad. I hope I didn't grill you too much as well, but no, it's been a real pleasure having you on as well, and no doubt get you on in the future. We'll talk even deeper financial stuff as well, because we've only scattered the surface of the subject today. But it's been a real pleasure speaking to you and catching up. So thank you for being guest number 55 on the Feeling Inspired podcast. And to everyone else, if you've just joined, do not worry if you missed. You can obviously watch a replay, or you can catch the podcast. It will be uploaded to all the podcasting platforms within 24 hours as well, so you'll be able to listen to Roma's dulcet tones as much as you want.
I don't think that's ever been said before.
I'm just polite. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so thank you again, and thank you to everyone who's been watching as well. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Feel Inspired podcast. But for now, thank you again, Roma, and I'll catch you all soon. Ciao.
Bye.